might sound strange, but I've imagined kissing you." She said it with a small, hesitant smile, and I felt a slow smile spread across my own face as I leaned in just a little closer. "That's funny, because right now your lips are the only thing I can see." Before the words had even fully left my mouth, the door clicked softly shut behind us, closing out the rest of the world. "Are you sure about this?" I whispered, my voice barely a rustle in the quiet room. She answered not with words, but by grabbing the front of my shirt, her fingers tightening in the fabric. "I got here first, didn't I?" Our breath tangled together before our lips ever met. It was a kiss hotter than any memory I held, deeper than any fantasy I'd ever dared to have. I didn't know you'd feel so solid," she breathed against my skin. "You can come closer, deeper. You're filling me up. Just stay right there." Our whispers became a rhythm all their own, a secret language spoken in the dark. We moved together, a push and pull of discovery and surrender, as the night deepened around us, holding us in its embrace. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story, a quick click on the subscribe and like buttons would mean the world to me. It's a small gesture of love that helps keep these stories coming. Now let's begin. My name is Robert, and at 46 years old, I was what you'd call an ordinary middle-aged man. I was a manager at a decent company, married for 15 years, with a son just starting high school. The only thing that made my life a little different was that I was living it alone. 2 years ago, a promotion had brought me to Chicago, but my wife and son had stayed behind in our hometown in Ohio. So, I became one of those guys you hear about, a weekend dad, living out of a suitcase in a quiet apartment, trying to bridge the distance with phone calls and long drives on I-80. My salary was about $75,000 a year, enough to keep us comfortably middle class, but my days were marked by a quiet loneliness that only the weekend reunions could temporarily erase. Lately, though, things had been looking up. I'd caught the attention of my department head, Mark Thompson, and another promotion seemed to be just around the corner. The day of the company's founding anniversary gala, I put on my usual dark suit and headed for the hotel ballroom. I'd been with the company for over 20 years, but these formal events still made me feel awkward and out of place, like a teenager at his first dance. "Rob, over here," Mark called out, waving me over. At 48, Mark was a man driven by ambition, a perfectionist known for his demanding nature. But for all his intensity, he had a reputation for taking care of his people, and I'd always considered him a good boss. Standing beside him was a woman who radiated a quiet, timeless elegance. "I want you to meet my wife, Carol," he said, placing a hand on her back. "Honey, this is Robert Miller, the manager I'm always telling you about." In that instant, I swear my heart stopped beating. As she lifted her head and her eyes met mine, the air left my lungs. I couldn't speak. It was Carol, 45 years old, married for 18 years with a daughter in middle school. I knew she'd worked for a while before getting married, but had since become a full-time homemaker. And I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that back in high school, she had been the most beautiful girl in the entire school. Her expression mirrored my own shock. A silent, frozen moment passed between us, a pocket of stillness in the bustling ballroom. When Mark stepped away to greet another guest, we finally spoke, our voices barely above a whisper. "Is it really you, Carol?" "Yes," she breathed. "Robert, it's really you." Her voice was the same, yet it wasn't. It held the same gentle melody I remembered, but now it was layered with a depth that only time and life could create. Robert and Carol. We had been classmates, but never in the same class. We knew of each other, of course. Everyone knew who she was, but we'd never been close. We were just two familiar faces passing in a crowded hallway. That night, back in my empty apartment, sleep was impossible. My mind kept drifting back through the decades. In high school, Carol had been an almost mythical figure, the object of quiet admiration from nearly every boy in school. I was one of them, loving her from a distance, my heart hammering in my chest whenever she happened to pass me in the hall. But I was a shy kid, and I'd never once found the courage to say a single word to her. And now here she was, the wife of my boss. It felt like a stone had been thrown into the placid, predictable waters of my middle-aged life, and the ripples were turning into waves. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was doing my weekly grocery shopping at the Whole Foods near my apartment. The place was packed, a chaotic weekend ritual. I was in the produce section trying to pick out a decent-looking onion when a familiar silhouette caught my eye. My heart gave a familiar lurch. It was Carol, pushing a cart slowly down the aisle. She saw me at the same moment, and a look of surprise washed over her face. "You live around here?" she asked, her voice a mixture of awkwardness and genuine warmth. "We're practically neighbors." For a man of 46, I'd managed to keep myself in decent shape. And Carol, though she carried the soft, settled grace of motherhood, was still undeniably beautiful. "It's a small world," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Looks like we are." We stood there for a few minutes, making small talk about our lives. "It's still so strange, thinking of you as my husband's employee," she said with a little laugh. But as she spoke, I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of loneliness that resonated deep within me. She lived in a beautiful condo on the Gold Coast, but I could sense the quiet solitude of a woman whose world had become very small. The encounter was brief, but as we said our goodbyes, I felt a distinct sense of reluctance, a feeling that we both wished it could have lasted longer. A few days after that, my doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood there holding a box. "Robert Miller?" he asked. I took the package and glanced at the shipping label. Something was off. The address was mine, but the name on it read Carol Thompson. At that very moment, a similar scene was unfolding at Carol's condo. A package had arrived, but instead of the cosmetics she'd ordered, it contained a man's dress shirt. The name on the label was Robert Miller. The name immediately brought her back to our chance meeting in the grocery store. After a quick call to the delivery company to confirm the address mix-up, she was the one who reached out. "Robert, it's Carol. I think we got each other's packages." I recognized her voice instantly. "Carol, you're not going to believe this, but I was just about to call you for the same reason." We arranged to meet up and swap the boxes. That evening, I found myself standing in front of her building, a high-end condo complex that, despite its luxury, felt strangely quiet and impersonal. "I'm so sorry about this," she said, opening the door. "What a bizarre coincidence." "Don't be," I said, handing her the box. "Honestly, it's nice to have a reason to see you again." The air between us was charged with a palpable awareness. The conversation was short, but as I turned to leave, we both hesitated, the unspoken feeling of disappointment hanging between us. It was just a simple, random mistake, but it had served to connect us once more, a thread pulling us out of our separate, routine lives. A week later, Carol had to take her cat to the vet. The little guy hadn't been eating, and she was worried. As she sat in the waiting room, she heard a familiar voice. "We have got to stop meeting like this." She looked up to see me walking in, holding a small beagle in my arms. I was smiling. "You've got to be kidding me," she replied, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "What are the odds?" My dog, Buster, was just there for his annual shots. We spent the next half hour in the waiting room talking about our pets, our conversation easy and natural. "So you're a cat person," I said. "How old is he?" "He just turned 7, she said, a hint of worry in her voice. "I'm just so concerned. He's usually got such a good appetite." After their appointments were done, I found myself suggesting something on impulse. "Hey, if you have some time, would you want to grab a cup of coffee?" She hesitated for only a second before nodding. We found a quiet little cafe nearby and ended up talking for over 2 hours. We filled in the 30-year gap between then and now, talking about everything from high school memories to the realities of our current lives. "Back then, I couldn't even work up the nerve to say hello to you," I admitted, my voice tinged with a nostalgic sort of wonder. "I know," she said, her eyes shining with a light I hadn't seen before. "Life is so strange, isn't it?" It was a special pocket of time, a brief escape from the monotony of our days. When it was finally time to part, neither of us wanted to. It was 2 in the morning, and Carol and her husband, Mark, were fighting again. "What do you even do all day?" he yelled, his voice sharp with anger. "Just sit around this expensive apartment, spending my money?" "I used to have a career," she shot back, her voice trembling with a long-suppressed resentment. "You're the one who wanted me to quit. That was then. The kids are grown now. You should be doing something with your life." Mark was always like this. He'd ignore her for weeks, lost in his own world of work and ambition, and then suddenly erupt with a possessive need to control her life. "Then tell me to go back to work. Why do you insist I stay home and then throw it in my face?" Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her coat and stormed out of the apartment, tears streaming down her face as she walked aimlessly through the deserted city streets. She ended up in a 24-hour convenience store, seeking refuge under the harsh fluorescent lights. At that same moment, I was also wide awake. Stress about the upcoming promotion had my mind racing, and I'd walk down to the same store for a beer, hoping it might help me sleep. As I walked in, I saw her, huddled in a corner booth, crying. "Carol," I said, startled. "What's wrong? What happened?" Seeing me, she seemed to break down completely. "Mark and we had a fight." I bought a couple of beers and sat down across from her. "Talk to me," I said gently. "Don't just hold it all in." We moved from the sterile convenience store to a quiet, all-night cafe next door. Over lukewarm coffee, she poured out her heart. The loneliness of her marriage, the suffocating reality of being a stay-at-home wife with nothing to call her own. I found myself opening up, too, sharing my own frustrations, the quiet desperation of a man in his mid-40s feeling like his life was on autopilot. The hours melted away. Before we knew it, it was 4 a.m., and the thought of leaving was unbearable. "I know I shouldn't say this," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but I don't want to go home." My heart started to pound in my chest. "Robert," she began, her voice faltering as she looked down at her hands. She let out a small, nervous laugh. "This is going to sound crazy." She paused, then took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. "I've imagined kissing you." I slowly met her gaze, and she didn't look away. The heat I saw wasn't in her cheeks. It was in her eyes, a deep, simmering warmth. I let a small smile touch my lips and tilted my head. "That's funny, because right now, your lips are the only thing I can see." We stood up without another word, a silent understanding passing between us. The walk to the motel across the street felt both inevitable and surreal. I never imagined our 30-year reunion would lead to this, to a moment so charged with unspoken need. As the motel room door clicked shut, our eyes met for a brief, intense second, and that was all it took. "Are you sure?" I asked, though my voice was a caress, already moving closer. My eyes told her I already knew the answer. "I got here first, didn't I?" she whispered, pulling me closer by my shirt. Our lips met, and it wasn't just a beginning. It was an explosion. It was hotter than memory, deeper than imagination. "I didn't know. You'd feel so solid," she breathed, her fingertips digging into my shoulders. "I just want to be buried in you right now." My hand traced the delicate curve of her spine, a slow, reverent exploration. "You can come deeper," she urged, her words less a whisper and more a command from the very core of her being. She opened herself to me, a warm, waiting welcome, and I didn't hesitate for a second longer. As our bodies joined, a soft gasp escaped her lips, a sound that seemed to fill the room with a tangible heat, like music. "You're filling me up," she murmured. "Just like that." Her hands slid down my back as I began to move, slowly at first, matching the rhythm of a heartbeat. Our movements became one, our breaths tangled, and as I reached deeper inside her, our gazes blurred, our voices becoming lost in sensation. "I want to feel this. Just keep feeling this," she pleaded, her voice trembling. That tremor was all the encouragement I needed, pulling me further in. There was no reason to stop, no room for hesitation. It was 5 in the morning, and we were lying tangled in each other's arms when the silence was shattered by the ringing of a phone. Carol's phone. The screen lit up with a single word, "Hubby." The color drained from her face. "Carol? Where are you?" Mark's voice, tinny and demanding, came through the speaker. I held my breath, listening, my body frozen next to hers. "I'm at a friend's house," she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to keep it steady. "I'm just going to stay here tonight." "A friend's house? At this hour?" "I'll explain later. Don't worry about me." When the call ended, she looked at me, her eyes wide. A wave of guilt and adrenaline washed over us simultaneously. The reality crashed down on me. I was deceiving my boss, the man who was about to promote me, but the thought of letting her go, of sending her back to that cold apartment, was impossible. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her face etched with regret. "I'm so sorry for putting you in this situation." "It's okay," I said, pulling her into my arms. "This isn't our fault." We stayed together until the sun came up. It was reckless, it was dangerous, but leaving felt like the greater crime. The next morning, I was supposed to be off anyway. I'd scheduled a vacation day weeks ago. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. "Rob, sorry to bother you on your day off, but I need a huge favor." It was Mark. "Sure, Mark. What's up?" I said, my voice tight. I glanced at Carol, who had gone rigid beside me, her eyes wide with fear as she recognized her husband's voice. "Can I get my wife to borrow your car?" Mark asked, sounding rushed. "My father had a fall and needs to go to the hospital, but I'm stuck in a critical meeting I can't get out of." His voice was laced with frustration. "You live close to us, right? Could she just swing by and pick it up? Are you home right now?" Yeah, sure," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "She told me she's at a friend's place." "I'll text you the address," Mark said quickly. "I'm really sorry about this, man. I know it's your day off." As soon as he hung up, I looked at Carol. We scrambled out of the motel, a silent, panicked energy between us. The tension in my car was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That was way too close, I said, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Carol stared out the window, her expression a storm of conflicting emotions. To be caught in such a precarious situation because of her husband's family emergency was an irony too cruel to bear. When we pulled up to her building, she jumped out of the car. "Wait here. I just need to change." She ran inside, leaving me alone in the car, my mind racing. What if Mark was home? What if this was some kind of trap? The 10 minutes she was gone felt like an eternity. She emerged wearing a simple, conservative outfit, looking like the perfect, dutiful wife. I got out of the driver's seat and handed her the keys. "I'm so sorry, Robert," she said, her eyes filled with a mixture of apology and fear. "It's okay," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Just be careful." I watched her drive away in my car, and then immediately called Mark. "Hey, Mark." Carol picked up the car. "Thanks, Rob. You're a lifesaver. I really owe you one." After I hung up, my heart continued to race. I didn't know how long I could handle this kind of high-wire act. The next day at work, seeing Mark was torture. An almost unbearable tension seized my entire body. "Hey, thanks again for yesterday," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Don't mention it," I replied, trying my best to sound normal. "Happy to help." Inside, I was screaming, terrified that my guilt was written all over my face. All day, I couldn't stop thinking about Carol. I couldn't focus in meetings, my mind replaying the previous night, the fear, the thrill. At lunchtime, I was sitting alone when my phone buzzed with a text. It was from her. Asterisk, "Thank you for yesterday. Be careful." Asterisk. It was a short message, but it made my heart leap. I wanted to write back, to tell her I couldn't stop thinking about her, but I knew it was too risky. I forced myself to put the phone away. At 46, I never thought I'd feel this way again. This intoxicating mix of fear and desire. When I went home to my empty apartment that night, the quiet, predictable life I'd built suddenly felt hollow and colorless. A few nights later, we met again at the same 24-hour convenience store. She'd had another fight with Mark. "Again?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. "Yes," she said, her voice weary. "He's getting suspicious." Mark had started questioning her late-night absences, though he had no concrete proof. "This is getting dangerous, Carol. We can't keep doing this." "I know," she said, "but being at home, it feels like I'm suffocating." We ended up at the same cafe and then, inevitably, at the same motel. And just like before, Mark's call came in the middle of the night. "Honey, what are you doing?" "Just catching up with a friend." I lay beside her, silent, holding my breath as she spun another lie. It was a dangerous game, but we couldn't seem to stop playing. We were two people desperate for an escape from the quiet boredom of our lives, and the rediscovery of this 30-year-old connection was too powerful to resist. One afternoon at the office, Mark called me into his office and shut the door. "My wife," he began, his expression grim. "She's been going out late at night a lot recently." My heart hammered against my ribs. Have you ever seen her around? Maybe at that 24-hour store near your place." It was a direct hit. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "No, I haven't seen her." "It's strange," Mark continued, his eyes narrowed in thought. "She keeps saying she's meeting friends," but he was getting closer to the truth. That evening, I called Carol in a panic. "He knows. He's suspicious. We have to be more careful." Her own voice was frantic. I think he's been trying to check my phone. The thought of him finding our texts or calls sent a chill down my spine. We can't contact each other for a while, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It's too dangerous. But a few days later, we found ourselves in the same convenience store again. The pull was too strong, the need to see each other overwhelming the fear. My days became a living hell. Every time I saw Mark's face at work, I was convinced he knew. I was drowning in a sea of guilt and terror. And I knew Carol must be feeling the same, living under her husband's watchful eye, each day a struggle to maintain the facade. One afternoon, Mark asked me to step out with him. "Rob, you got a minute? Let's grab a coffee." His expression was more serious than I'd ever seen it. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed him out of the office, a cold dread creeping up my spine. This is it, I thought. He knows. We sat down in a quiet cafe, and Mark let out a long, heavy sigh. "Look, this is personal. I don't know who else to talk to about this." He spoke cautiously, choosing his words with care. I held my breath, my nerves stretched to their breaking point. "It's about my house, about Carol. I haven't been sleeping well." He stared into his coffee cup as he spoke. My hands began to tremble. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper. "A few days ago," he said, his voice low and pained, "an acquaintance of mine, he said he saw her with another man." The world seemed to freeze. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Really?" I managed to choke out, my voice cracking. "Yeah, late at night near that convenience store. He said he saw her walking with some guy." Mark looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate pain. "He said he was too far away to be sure, couldn't see the guy's face clearly. Said it could have just been someone who looked like her." A wave of relief, cold and sharp, washed over me. But the danger was still there, hanging over my head like a guillotine. "So, what are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That's the problem," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I can't prove anything. If I accuse her and I'm wrong, it'll just make things worse between us." I was trapped in a nightmare. I understood his pain, his confusion, and I was the cause of it. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on me. "But the way she's been acting lately," he continued, sighing again. "Something's different. Her expression. It's like she's a million miles away." "Different how?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She's always distracted, staring at her phone, and she's always going out at night, saying she's meeting friends." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of answer. "Last night, she left at 2 in the morning and didn't come back until sunrise." He was describing the night we had just spent together. I felt sick. "What do you think, Rob?" he asked, his gaze intense. "Be honest with me. As a man, what does this look like to you?" It was an impossible question. How could I answer? "Well," I stammered, "without any real proof." I know," he interrupted, sounding utterly defeated. "But this suspicion is eating me alive. When I look at her now, I feel like she's thinking about another man." His words were a dagger in my heart, because they were true. "I guess this is what it feels like," he said with a bitter smile. "To think your wife is cheating on you. The not knowing is the worst part." I couldn't listen anymore. His pain was my creation. "Mark, maybe you're overthinking it," I said, my voice shaking. "It could all be a misunderstanding." "I hope so," he said, nodding slowly. "God, I hope so. but I'm gonna keep my eyes open. If this keeps up." He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. "Thanks for listening, man. Don't mention this to anyone." "Of course," I said. "Your secret's safe with me." The moment I left the cafe, I ran to the men's room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial her number. I had to tell her everything. "Carol, we have a huge problem," I said, my voice urgent. Her anxious breathing on the other end of the line told me she knew this was serious. I recounted my entire conversation with Mark. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling with panic. I was just as scared, but I had to be the calm one. We both knew with a terrifying certainty that we were standing on the edge of a cliff. Someone had seen us. The game was over. That night we met for the last time. We chose a quiet bar in a neighborhood neither of us ever went to. Carol's face was pale, and I'm sure mine was too. "Do you really think someone saw us?" she asked, her voice fragile. "He said they weren't sure," I replied heavily. "But it's too close. Too risky." We sat in silence for a long time, the unspoken truth hanging between us. We were saying goodbye. "We have to stop seeing each other," she said finally, her voice breaking. I nodded, my heart aching. There was no other choice. "These past few weeks, they meant everything to me," she said, fighting back tears. "I'll never forget them," I whispered, reaching across the table to take her hand one last time. We didn't say it out loud, but we both knew this was the end. We couldn't continue this dangerous dance. I watched her walk away, a lump forming in my throat. She didn't look back, and I knew why. Looking back would have hurt too much. And just like that, we returned to our separate realities. For the next few weeks, I walked on eggshells. Every time I saw Mark at the office, I was sure he knew. I cut off all contact with Carol, terrified of leaving any trace. Mark himself seemed on edge, his mood dark and volatile. I knew he was still watching her. Every day was a form of torture, a constant battle with my own fear and guilt. Then, one day, Mark called me into his office. "Rob, I have something important to tell you." His face was unreadable. This was it. He knew everything. "I'm being transferred," he said, the words catching me completely off guard. "Corporate is moving me to the Seattle branch." A wave of relief and a strange, complicated sadness washed over me. "When are you leaving?" "Beginning of next month. The whole family is moving out there with me." He sighed. "To be honest, things at home have been tense. I'm hoping a change of scenery will do us some good." The guilt returned, stronger than ever. I had helped create the problems in his marriage, the very problems that were now forcing him to uproot his entire life. "You've been a great help to me, Rob," he said, his voice sincere. "I couldn't have done half this work without you." His words were another twist of the knife. "I learned so much from you, Mark," I said, my voice hollow. On the day he moved, I watched from a distance as the moving truck was loaded. I caught a glimpse of Carol, just for a second. She seemed to look in my direction, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, before she quickly turned away. We couldn't even say a final goodbye. And so our 30-year reunion came to an end. It was a brief, intense, impossible chapter. 6 months later, I was promoted to Mark's old position. He had recommended me for it before he left. The irony was devastating. He had looked out for the very man who had betrayed him. A year passed. Sometimes, I would drive past that 24-hour convenience store late at night. It all started there. I'd think to myself, lost in a memory that felt like it belonged to another man's life. After 2 years, My own situation had stabilized enough for my family to finally join me in Chicago. My wife and son moved up, and my lonely life as a weekend father came to an end. But a part of my heart remained cordoned off, a quiet space that still held the memory of Carol. One day, a business trip took me to Seattle. On a whim, I called Mark just to see how he was doing. "Rob, good to hear from you, man." His voice sounded lighter, happier than I remembered. "How's the family?" I asked cautiously. "Much better," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The move was the best thing for us. Carol seems more at peace. She even went back to work part-time. It's been good for her. She seems alive again." I felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that she was happy, and a strange, selfish pang of sadness. It's been 3 years now. I live a normal life, a quiet, domestic existence with my wife and son. But sometimes, late at night when sleep won't come, my mind wanders back to that time. The 30-year reunion, the dangerous affair born in a late-night convenience store. It was a brief escape from the crushing weight of middle-aged monotony, a desperate grasp for something real. But the price was higher than I ever could have imagined. I often find myself lost in thought, turning it over and over in my mind. Was it really love? Or was it just two lonely people clinging to each other in the dark? I still don't have a clear answer. All I know is that in those moments, for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, intensely alive. But that feeling is forever tangled with the guilt of betraying a good man, a good boss. It's a weight I know I'll carry for the rest of my life. I gave a man I respected a wound that may never fully heal. And I know that somewhere out there, Carol must feel something similar. I wonder how she remembers those hours we stole, the lies she told her husband. Our dangerous connection began in the sterile light of a convenience store and ended in the quiet darkness of a lonely bar. In the end, nothing tangible was left, but the memory itself is impossible to erase. I tell myself it will never happen again, and I mean it, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I find myself missing the tremble of that forbidden thrill. And that, I suppose, is the bitter aftertaste of an affair in the autumn of one's life. This is the end of my story. If you've listened this far, I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being here with me.